Britain's newest partnership in the fight against terror. David Cameron flies into Algeria to sign a security deal. Remembering the British victims of the Algerian hostage crisis, Mr. Cameron's offering shared intelligence and joint planning.
An intelligence approach that brings together all the things we need to do with countries in this neighbourhood to help them, to make them safer, but to make us safer too.
We'll be asking if the Algerians will make dependable partners. Also tonight, an angry reaction from motoring organisations after an official report says drivers are not being ripped off at the pumps.
This is a bit of a whitewash because the OFT have said there's no problem with prices rising like a rocket and falling like a feather. They've looked at it for 6 weeks, we've looked at it for 6 years.
Highly radioactive waste in need of a home. The search for a disposal facility is still on after Cumbria says no. And a dramatic appeal for gun control in America from the congresswoman shot in the head 2 years ago.
Be bold, be courageous. Americans are counting on you.
Tonight on BBC London, the brother of the former EastEnders actress Gemma McCluskey is jailed for her murder. And could the tube run an hour later at weekends? Well, the very idea is upsetting the unions.
Good evening. David Cameron is in Algeria tonight, the first visit by a British Prime Minister in more than 50 years. After a meeting with the country's leaders, Mr. Cameron has unveiled a new security partnership that could include shared intelligence and joint planning in the fight against Islamist militants in the region. It follows the death of dozens of foreign workers, including 6 British citizens, after insurgents linked to Al-Qaeda took control of a gas plant 2 weeks ago. Our political editor, Nick Robinson, is travelling with the Prime Minister and has just sent this report.
It may look like Kent, but this is the coast of North Africa. The place David Cameron has warned could become a magnet for Al-Qaeda terrorism. What happens here has the capacity to affect us all, the Prime Minister claims. 2 weeks after 6 British hostages died in an oil plant in the desert, it hardly needs saying. At the memorial to the martyrs, the thousands who died here fighting the French, the obvious question, though, is whether foreign involvement makes things better or worse.
What I want to do is work with the Algerian government and with other governments in the region to make sure that we do everything we can to combat terrorism in a way that is both tough and intelligent and uses everything we have at our disposal, which will make them safer, make us safer, make the world safer.
Can you reassure people watching that North Africa won't become to David Cameron what Afghanistan or Iraq were to Tony Blair?
I can give that assurance because we don't look at this region of the world and think that the answer is purely a military one. It isn't. What is required in countries like Mali, just as countries like Somalia on the other side of Africa, is that combination of a tough approach on security, aid, politics, settling grievances and problems, an intelligence approach that brings together all the things we need to do with countries in this neighbourhood to help them, to make them safer, but to make us safer too.
This is the new front line in what David Cameron has called a generational struggle, much of it a vast stretch of desert, the In Amenas gas plant over 800 miles south of the capital. Next door, Libya, now so dangerous that British people have been advised to evacuate Benghazi. And the Algerians believe that the terrorists who attacked In Amenas trekked across the Sahara from Mali, where French soldiers are now fighting. When the cameras weren't filming the Prime Minister and his Algerian counterpart, they were joined by the head of MI6 to agree a security partnership, the sharing of intelligence and advice on border and aircraft security. The Cameron vision, not just better security, but expanded trade links and, of course, oil. David Cameron insists that his approach to this region, to North Africa, is to help what he calls this neighbourhood to help itself.
The question that he knows he faces at home, though, is at what price? In men and in money.
His answer, working with countries we once ignored, is cheaper than war and cheaper than doing nothing. Nick Robinson, BBC News, Algiers.
So, as we've heard, the Prime Minister says Algeria is critical in the fight against terrorism in North Africa and beyond. But what kind of relationship can the UK expect? Our special correspondent, Alan Little, is here. Alan.
George, when Algerian forces stormed the gas plant that had been seized by Islamist militants this month, it should have come as no surprise. Violence and the fight against Islamic extremism have played prominent roles throughout much of that country's modern history. The Algerian state has been moulded by that experience. Today's Algeria was born in violence. Its decade-long war for independence from colonial France ended in 1962. It was a bitter and bloody guerrilla conflict. Both sides used torture. There were acts of terror against civilians. When it ended, Algeria said 1.5 million people had died. The euphoria of independence didn't last long. Post-colonial Algeria became a one-party dictatorship. Islamic militancy took root among the opposition. The country slipped into a civil war that lasted throughout the 1990s. The state's crackdown on the Islamists was ruthless. Tens of thousands were killed. Peace and security were restored by the end of the 1990s, but the social conditions in which extremism had grown have not gone away.
Challenges are, how does President Bouteflika and his government produce social change in that country? How do they get the wealth to trickle down to the poor villages? It's, I'm afraid, not a very well organized country. They could do a lot better, and frankly, they need to.
Britain is now forging a new security partnership with an autocratic state that has shown few scruples about the use of force. What can David Cameron offer a country that already has so powerful a security apparatus?
He's going to Algeria specifically to develop local relations with the Algerians, to help develop their counter-terrorism programs in so much as they need it. They've got quite advanced programs by themselves already. It's probably a case of intelligence sharing. Our government has a pretty good intelligence networks, and helping the Algerians maybe with some of this, giving them access to some of this intelligence will help them counter their problems.
The attack on the gas plant at In Amenas was an audacious assault on Algeria's most vital strategic asset. It was a profound shock to a state that thought it had contained the terrorist threat. Well, for Britain, North Africa is a new and emerging theatre in the fight against terrorism. But Algeria has faced a terrorist threat there for decades, and it showed the world this month that it's ready to act swiftly, with lethal force and without compromise. George.
Alan, thank you.